Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. This is Timothy Flanders at 1 Peter 5, together with a few friends, contributing editors to 1 Peter 5, Kennedy Hall and Peter Kwasniewski, and Matt Gaspers from our friends over at Catholic Family News. Happy Annunciation observed, gentlemen, and Eclipse End of the World Day as well. Christ is risen.
Indeed,
it's a great day to be a Catholic. We're here talking about episode 3 of Mass of the Ages. The trilogy is now complete, and Cameron Ahern has been gracious enough to host a totally honest review. This is going to be totally honest. I want to give a few caveats here. Nobody here is speaking on behalf of Mass of the Ages. This conversation is merely being hosted by Mass of the Ages. Obviously, I'm the editor of 1 Peter 5, and 1 Peter 5 is in an organization with Mass of the Ages, which is the Crusade of Eucharistic Reparation. So we are partners in this laicidality, and I podcast on this channel. But what I say and what these gentlemen say, we're not trying to represent even 1 Peter 5 or Mass of the Ages, but we're just trying to be who we are. We're speaking for ourselves. But this is going to be totally honest. So this will be pluses and minuses of the film and the trilogy. And we'll be discussing everyone's views here. A few housekeeping announcement I wanted to make before we got into the actual review. First of all, an issue that we are going to talk about is the SSPX, because obviously that was the big elephant of the room that was noted at the end of the film. And I was concerned. I wanted to say this first because I was a little concerned with the optics of the way that the film kind of came out. Because I want to clarify that it's very clear that the Mass of the Ages in LatinMass.com is not anti-SSPX at all. Mm-hmm. On LatinMass.com, there is a database of Latin Masses. So it lists every one of them. It's got diocesan, FSSP, and an SSPX is listed just among all the Latin Masses. The film itself says that the SSPX serves such 100,000 Catholics.
I think it even links to Dr. Kwasniewski's article for 1 Peter 5 about can a Catholic attend one, if I recall correctly.
There we go. So it's just to be clear, SSPXers or not, or anybody might disagree with the portrayal or the use of the SSPX in the film. But just so everybody's clear, the Mass of the Ages is not against the SSPX, but the SSPX is included in the Latin Mass list. I actually spoke to Jim Vogel on the phone earlier today, and he confirmed to me that the SSPX lack of presence in the film is not a withdrawal of support for the film. It was a withdrawal of their presence due to they weren't able to work out the exact details of everything in the film. But it is clear that the Mass of the Ages is open to further collaboration. Maybe they'll do a film about all about the SSPX and Archbishop Lefebvre or something like that. I certainly liked the portrayal. I liked the inclusion of Archbishop Lefebvre's own sermon. I thought at the consecration, I thought it was great. He said, I could not leave them orphans. I thought that was great. Anyways, just to clarify that, before we get into that topic, which we will get into very soon. And then lastly, I want to mention that the audience of the Mass of the Ages trilogy is non-trads. And that's an important point, just to understand the scope and the intentions of the entire trilogy. I think it's very important that we, at least, I think we can all agree that Mass of the Ages trilogy is an overall good thing for the trad movement. The trad movement has never had something like this before. The trad movement has been underground, has been fighting through Latin Masses in hotels, through newspapers, through lectures, books, but there's never been a media apostolate like this, which is reaching out to the non-trad world. And that is a very good thing. And so I think that's an important moment in the history of the trad movement to have this. So with all that, with all those caveats, I want to first go to the liturgical scholar we have among us, which is Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. Dr. Kwasniewski, you have the floor. What are your thoughts on episode 3 and the entire trilogy?
Thank you, Timothy. So first of all, I just want to say that I loved each part of the trilogy, each episode. I felt that each one brought something special and unique. There's not all that much. There's really no redundancy among the three of them. And the way that I've been thinking about the relationship of the three is that the first episode, to my mind, predominantly presents the beauty of the traditional Latin Mass. I mean, it has a personal story. It has all kinds of other things too. Each one of the episodes has a little bit of everything in it, but the first one really focuses on the beauty of the traditional Latin Mass. It's lots of footage of the Mass itself. The second episode focuses on the truth about the devastation wrought on the Mass in the liturgical so-called reform. And the third episode looks at the goodness of the people who attend the traditional Latin Mass. So I see it as like the three transcendentals: beauty, truth, and goodness is in a way how I think about this trilogy. I also would say the third episode for me was the most deeply moving emotionally. I mean, I don't weep easily. I'm not a weepy person, but I cried. I cried both times I watched it. When I saw it in the theater in Chicago at the world premiere, and then last night when I watched it with my wife because I wanted to, have it fresh in my mind, and I was weeping. I went through a couple of tissues. I don't know why. It just really, I do know why, actually. It's because when you listen to the stories of the people, especially those French mothers who really are the heroes in a sense, they're kind of like the unlikely underdog heroes of episode 3. When you listen to them and their evident love for the church, love for the priesthood, love for tradition, and their pain and their suffering, that's being inflicted on them by Traditionis Custodes and the whole sort of anti-traditional juggernaut. You'd have to have a heart of stone not to sympathize, not to empathize, right? So I think the third episode, in a way, it's not making a theological argument, although you could get some theological arguments from it, but it's showing the human face. It's showing the human, dare I say, dignity on this April 8th. It's showing the dignity of the people who attend the Mass and the harm that is being done to those people, right? I also just want to say that the one of the greatest things about episode 3, and this will be my last comment before I turn the floor to others, is the way that it shows the international scope of the traditional Latin Mass movement. It's not just an American, spoiled American conservative phenomenon, of rigid, Midwesterners or whatever, whatever Antonio Spadaro thinks over at the Vatican. It's a movement that includes Africa, it includes Mexico, it includes people who are educated, like the atheist from Nice, and simple people from Tanzania who dance around, and sing, but they love the Latin Mass. They don't even understand it word for word, but they love it. It speaks to their souls. And I think that shows the power of tradition has always been something that everybody can tap into, that appeals to everybody, wherever they're at, because it is this sort of dense forest of symbols that draws everybody into the sacred and into the worship of Almighty God. And I think that alone makes episode 3 an extremely powerful apologetic tool.
Yeah, that was also one of my favorite things of the international scope. My favorite line of the film was the African boy who says, "What do you think of the future of the church?" I think it's great. I don't know what he said exactly, but he was like, "I'm thinking it's pretty good." Great.
I think the African trad grandma chanting the credo is pretty good too.
Oh yeah, that might be better even. Yeah, try to mess with her, Vatican. Go ahead, mess with her. Let's, I guess I should go to Matt Gaspers first because we want to show this video, and that's going to introduce the whole SSPX issue as well. I know Kennedy Hall, you've already released a video review, but Matt, you want to tell us about your thoughts, and then we can show your video whenever you're ready.
Sure. So maybe I can. Well, do you want to show the video first, or do you want me to give kind of my general
whatever you want
first? Okay. Well, I'll explain the video towards the end of my response. But this is a video clip I captured during a Q&A after I saw the film in a theater down in Denver on March 17th when it premiered, or was shown there. But I think I definitely agree with what Dr. K has already said. I think that's a brilliant way of understanding the three films: the beauty, the truth, and the goodness. I think episode 3, one of the most crucial parts of it, in my opinion, are the segments that feature Diane Montagne's findings regarding the 2020 survey of bishops and their responses, and the truth about all of that, and how it's been spun by certain, I don't know if enemies is the right word or not, but bad actors in the Vatican who are making it look like most of the bishops are in favor of either suppressing the traditional mass altogether or, vastly and severely restricting it. And that's simply not the case. I think the fact that they brought up that there was a parallel report that came out before they were even done going through all of the answers from bishops. And that's, I guess, that's probably towards the hour mark, I think, of the film. I forget exactly. So I think that's probably one of the highlights, in my opinion, as far as like understanding how Traditionis Custodes came about, that it's really based on a lot of falsehoods. As far as weaknesses in the film, I think probably the main critique I have is the last couple of segments dealing with the question, and this is the question that was posed to Bishop Conley, the Bishop of Lincoln. Do you think the Pope can say the Latin Mass is completely forbidden? And I have to say I'm disappointed with His Excellency's answer and giving credence to the idea that it can be. And nothing against him personally. I think he's a very good man, a good bishop. He was actually an auxiliary bishop in my local diocese, the Archdiocese of Denver, before he was appointed to Lincoln, which I think is Dr. K's diocese. And I remember him celebrating a public traditional Latin Mass at the cathedral in Denver, which is probably the first time it's happened since the new Mass was introduced. I can't recall any other bishop doing that. So I think his heart is in the right place, but I would highly recommend that he read, and I'll do a book plug for Kwasniewski Press, Dr. K. This book that came out earlier this year, Ultramontanism and Tradition. And I'm honored to have a chapter in this book. Actually, I think Tim has some writings in here as well. And my chapter is called Can a Pope Abolish the Traditional Latin Mass? And that's a crucial question that needs to be addressed. And I don't think it was adequately addressed necessarily in the film, as well as the issue of true versus false obedience, which again, every bishop in the church should be reading this book right here.
There we go.
So those are kind of my general thoughts.
Oh yeah.
And you wanted me to introduce the video. That's
right.
right.
I mean, I wanted to agree with what you just said. The criticism. I think that the ending really didn't answer these huge questions. It just sort of posed them, and
right.
I was unhappy that there wasn't more of the other side of that equation represented. Like, no, it's actually, we will resist tooth and nail until we die. The Pope who says we can do that, which we've already been doing for 40 years plus, and we'll continue doing that. But that also brings up the SSPX, because the SSPX will obviously have an answer. No, we would not obey the Pope if he were to do that, because we've been continuing on the way that we thought was okay in the 1950s. That's what the SSPX was founded in 1970, completely canonically regular, to continue to do what was already done before the council. And in fact, Vatican II was invoked when SSPX was Optatus Totius was of Vatican II was invoked.
For international seminaries, right?
Exactly. Archbishop Lefebvre was actually invoking Vatican II to found the SSPX itself.
Right.
So he's actually implementing Vatican II when he creates SSPX. Yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about the SSPX. Gaspers, do you want to introduce the video before I play?
So as I mentioned, I went and saw the film in the theater, and I have to say it was really cool to see people that I know personally. Two of you guys here on the big screen, never had that experience before. So
sorry. Let me just interrupt you real quick, because we have the director has quote. He says, O'Hearn says, we had a section focused on obedience in GOT. What is that?
Guardians of Tradition.
Sorry. That was removed when we took out of the SSPX. We helped to include in the future film. Okay.
Oh, that's good to know.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I went and saw the film. I got to hang out with Cameron and as well as Dan Driver afterwards. We had a great time together. They posted about that on Twitter, I think. So after the film showed, they took some questions, and I submitted one, and we'll hear that shortly. And the context of it was at the just before the credits roll in episode 3, a message appears, which people who've seen the film will recall this. It says, just on a black screen, the SSPX were interviewed but ultimately decided not to be included in the film. The door is still open for future collaboration. So that's kind of the background to the question that I asked.
If you are at liberty to share, Dan Driver, why did the SSPX choose to withdraw support and involvement in the film?
Well, I mean, the wording of this says that they chose to withdraw support, which isn't strictly speaking true. We did a couple of interviews with them and tried to weave it into the narrative of the film, and what we found was that they, in the interviews, didn't say everything they wanted to say. So in order for us to be able to craft that into the narrative of the movie, we would have had to add 10, 15 minutes of a divergent part of a storyline, and it just became too cumbersome, and so we came to a mutual agreement where we said, let's just not do it in this film. If we end up doing a film together, let's wait to the future. That door is still open, and we loved the interviews that we did. We were able to interview a couple of their leadership, and it was incredible, and we hope to be able to show that side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So the end, he says, we hope to share that side of the story. So there's sort of a hope that Mass of the Ages would produce an SSPX movie or something that would be more extensive. So anyways, continue, Matt.
I don't know if I have a whole lot more to offer. I mean, as far as the SSPX is concerned, I think one detail that Kennedy will probably get into as well in his answer, but I mean, it technically is not. At one point, it's mentioned that John Paul II excommunicated Archbishop Lefebvre, and that's technically not true. In Ecclesia Dei, he says that Lefebvre and the priests who he consecrated bishops, quote, have incurred the grave penalty of excommunication envisaged by ecclesiastical law. Excuse me. And what he's referring to is canon, I think it used to be 1382, but for some reason now in the current layout on the Vatican website, it's 1387. I don't know if there were canons added at some point, but anyway, it says both the bishop who, without a pontifical mandate, consecrates a person a bishop, and the one who receives the consecration from him incur a late sententiae excommunication reserved to the Apostolic See, which essentially means an automatic excommunication. In Canon 1314, late sententiae, or automatic excommunication, is distinguished from ferende sententiae, which is something that's imposed by the authority. So it's a very technical detail and nuanced thing, but it is significant because canon law also says, 1323, no one is liable to a penalty who, when violating a law or precept, and then section 4 says, acted under the compulsion of grave fear, even if only relative, or by reason of necessity or grave inconvenience, unless, however, the act is intrinsically evil or tends to be harmful to souls. And Archbishop Lefebvre, as I'm sure you all know, specifically, explicitly invoked the case of necessity in his sermon for the consecrations on June 30th, 1988. So, and what's interesting about the canon law is that it doesn't even have to be objectively a state of necessity according to the authorities. If the person just subjectively believes he's in a case of necessity, then the penalty really doesn't apply. That's my understanding. Kennedy can take it from there.
Yeah, I know someone who literally wrote the book on that.
Yeah.
Kennedy, what say you, Canada?
Well, actually, I was in Ultramontanism in tradition in a couple of footnotes and as a translator for one of Roberto de Mattei's articles, so I did make it. But
Nice.
Funny enough, actually, in the back of Dr. K's other book, Bound by Truth, which I have on my desk right here, I was listed in the appendix underneath Scott Hahn, which I thought was amazing because never in a million years did I think that Kennedy Hall's name, it's alphabetical, of course, but I never thought it would be beside Scott Hahn's in a scholarly work. So pigs are flying and hell is frozen, and it's all the way up. Yeah. I mean, the whole SSPX question Matt gives a background. There's a lot to it. That here's not the place to do the sort of general apologetic. Again, I did write the book. If people want it, they can get it. That's something that's been done many, many times. It's only become relevant in the last couple of years just because of certain events and whatever. But in any case, yeah, the Mass of Ages crew is not anti-Society of St. Pius X. And I think I can share this, but when they were formulating a statement for the website, they actually asked my input a couple of years ago or whenever it was on how to say, like, you can go to the SSPX, and I helped them formulate a statement, which was just general. And so they've demonstrated their, their friendship, if that makes sense. They invited me to come to the thing, for goodness sake, so there must be something wrong with them. So as far as my view on the film, I believe sort of what Dr. K said. I thought the way that they decided to make the trilogy and kind of go with part 1, part 2, part 3 made a lot of sense. The first part was, the idea that you catch more bees with honey than vinegar. So this isn't a documentary of, look why the trads are right. It's look why tradition is beautiful. And I thought that was great. That was a beautiful story. And of course, I mean, a woman whose husband's dying of cancer and the traditional mass is a beautiful thing. I mean, this America loves a nice personal story, right? And I thought that was a really good idea. I thought they did a really good job. And also, I would say the cinematography in these films is exceptional. They really are incredible actual artists, which I've stressed in my review. The music on this film was amazing as well. Actually, I got to talk to the lead musician for the film, and I was really impressed with his work, and I told him so.
Another author at 1 Peter 5, I might say, Mark Nowitzki.
Yeah. Great minds think alike, or fools seldom differ, but either way, we're all together. But also, I did say this in my review as well. I have, for example, I haven't seen the recent Cabrini film, and there are opinions on all sides. I mean, some of the quote-unquote ultra-trads think it's great, and some of the more conservative neocons think it's so un-Catholic, and but I kind of brought that up in my review of people are starving for good Catholic art. I mean, good music, good films, good literature. So we do need to really support as much as we can these really incredible Catholic artists in this milieu of cinematography, which is something sorely needed. I mean, people are trying to, find a way to watch The Chosen, for example, which has many theological errors in it, but it's so well done as a show that they're like, man, I'll look past it because there's nothing else for them to watch, So we do need to have something, right? So I agree with that's important. The second film, I thought it was awesome. I mean, Michael Davies could have been the director of it. It was I was surprised at how hardcore it was. I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, whoa, they went there. They basically, made Paul VI and Bunini look like Freemason villains, and I was actually quite surprised that they went so far. Which, hey, good for them. And then the third film, that's the most difficult film in any trilogy, trying to wrap it up. And yes, could I criticize the portrayal of the SSPX? Well, if I didn't know what I know, then I would probably criticize it more. But knowing kind of a little bit of the backstory and giving the benefit of the doubt and knowing that it's not a film for trads, that makes a lot of sense. So I understand why you want to focus on the, what you can see in my little name here under my name of Full Communion, focusing on the quote unquote Full Communion groups. I get that. You're trying to sell people the traditional mass. People are nervous about the SSPX for a number of reasons, which is why I wrote a book on it. And it's not, you can't really do it justice in a short hour and a half when you've got so many other things to talk about. That just wouldn't be possible. Even if they said, Kennedy, we're going to do the best 10 minutes possible, can you help us? It's like, well, you need an hour and 10 minutes. I mean, you really need its own film. You need its own trilogy. The SSPX question is so vast because it touches on so many issues that I think if they had have included a 15, 20-minute thing on the SSPX, I think there would still be criticisms. I think that people would say, well, they said like this, or they didn't say enough about this, and it's like, you just can't do it. So I understand from a perspective of only having a certain amount of time, having a certain intention to show the reality of traditional Catholics after Traditionis Custodes. That was its own story, and that's the story they focused on. So I get it. I get it, and I don't have anything bad to say from that perspective. The only thing I will say that I think they still could have done is I think there could have been even just because for example, at the one point in the film, after they kind of finished the SSPX part, they put, the SSPX serves X amount of thousands of people and has this many priests, just as a little piece of information. I think they could have put a screen saying like, it should be noted that, great minds in the Catholic theological world have doubted the excommunication's validity since day one, and this is a widely held position amongst respectable theologians, or just something like that, just to sort of not just leave it in the mind of it happened and then sort of leave it there. If that makes sense. That's just kind of like a critique that I think that could have been helpful for some people. Now, I know they do want to do something about the society in the future, and I think that's a great idea. And I really hope they do. And I know a guy who can talk about it if they're looking for somebody. And so I do support them in that. So yeah, overall, I think the Trilogy did a very good job. I think a lot of people have attended the Mass because of it. I'm sure that's the case. And I think there's still work to be done, but it's also not their responsibility to do all the work. They're just one film crew making one series of films. They're not required to save the church. They're not required to restore tradition in the church. It's not up to one group or one person. So
we've seen what happens when people have that attitude, right? It doesn't go well.
It doesn't go well. So they've done their part, and they did a very good job. And I hope that they continue to do good work. That's kind of my take.
Excellent. Thank you, Henry. Matt, you had a comment about one of the moments with Archbishop Lefebvre.
Yeah, I think it was so great that they included this particular section of the Archbishop's June 30th, 1988 sermon, because he actually uses the phrase guard tradition. And it kind of makes me wonder if, there it is on my post on X, Twitter. We prefer to continue the tradition to guard tradition. So it kind of makes me wonder if Traditionis Custodes, the title of it, is kind of supposed to be a dig at him or something. I don't know. I didn't realize that phrase actually appeared in his sermon until I saw the film. It had been a while since I read the full text, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. I decided to screenshot that and put it up on Twitter.
Could I make a couple of points here?
Go ahead.
So I think we all can agree that the SSPX wants tradition to flourish everywhere throughout the church, and Archbishop Lefebvre himself would be the first to say, I'm not the only one who is fighting for or should be fighting for tradition. And so it was striking to me that when we looked at those French mothers, I'm sure you all noticed this, two of them were mothers of Institute of Christ the King priests. One was the mother of a Fraternity of St. Peter priest. One was the mother of a diocesan priest. And I forget, if the one was the sister of a Fongambeau monk. And so there was an interesting representation of all these different groups, which in their own ways and with certain disagreements among themselves, but nevertheless unified in love for the church, for the papacy, for the traditional liturgy, are moving forward together. Almost like, this is perhaps a cliche, but I almost view it as Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Without necessarily trying to say who is which group, right? But we definitely need to deploy all the forces. And one thing that really struck me the second time I watched the film is that the whole argument for tradition in a way is encapsulated. Well, I shouldn't say the whole argument because there are many branches to the argument, but a core piece of the argument is so well articulated by one of the French mothers. She says this, I'm just reading the translation. We see it's a branch of the tree that bears fruit. She means the traditional Catholic world and what it does. So why cut it? Why? I don't see why something that was sacred suddenly wouldn't be anymore. Something that was good wouldn't be good today. I think it's a treasure for the church. That's now talking about the Latin Mass, of course. Not a treasure that we hide in a museum. I think for the good of the church, we have to continue. This sounds like what Lefebvre is saying, right, in his homily. The husband of one of the French mothers says, you have to hold on for the long term, right? And then one of the other others says, the Latin Mass has not finished living. It has a very great future ahead of it. Many young people turn to this Mass and are converted through this Mass, and many, many young priests, right? Those are all direct quotations. Well, what they're all testifying to is, on the one hand, the inherent goodness and attractiveness of tradition and the traditional liturgy, right? That it's powerful. It's like a lion. If you let it out of the cage, it will take care of itself, right? Even if you leave it in the cage, people are going to come to it, right? But also, and this is a big theme for me, the relationship between authority and the common good, right? The tradition of the church, her traditional way of worshiping, her lex orandi, which is also her lex credendi, is part of the common good of the church, that her authority is obliged by God and before God to defend and to uphold and to promote, right? Not to attack, not to suppress, not to marginalize, etc., right? And I think that the film, without having to give too much intellectual statement of that position, effectively conveys the relationship between authority and the common good. And yes, it's true concerning the exact role of the Pope and the papacy. How much can the Pope do? The film is a little superficial in terms of at least tying that up. Maybe that's too harsh a word. It could have developed that theme a little bit more. However, I think the film as a whole ends up treating that theme visually and narratively, so that at the end of the film, you're left thinking, how in the world is it compatible with the Pope's job, or with Catholicism, period, to be working against these communities, these people, these liturgies? It doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely irrational, stunningly irrational, right? So in that sense, I think it's a very powerful apologetic for the common good of the church. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great point you brought up about Archbishop Lefebvre not saying the SSPX is the only group fighting for tradition. As I recall, one of the conditions that he had for having doctrinal discussions, and this is even after he passed away in 91, that one of them was free, like the Vatican has to admit that the old Mass was never abrogated, and that every priest of the Catholic Church has a right, an objective right, to say that Mass, in addition to some other things. So I think that actually precipitated the publication of Summorum Pontificum, as well as the lifting of the excommunications in 2009. Those were part of the society's conditions in order to enter into doctrinal discussions with Rome, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say this as well. Matt touched upon the fact that it gets weird when one person tries to take the whole traditional thing on themselves, and it does get weird. And this is why I know we call it the Latin Mass movement. I know we use that because that is a useful category of term. It's like, what do you support? Well, I support the Latin Mass movement. I get that. But one of the things that Archbishop Lefebvre said is, he said, I'm not the leader of a movement. He was very clear on this. He said, I'm not the leader of a movement. And it's funny, Dr. K, I just finished that Ultramontanism book over the last week when I was off technology for 10 days, which was the best 10 days of my life, getting off of the computer. And one of the, Stuart Chessman, one of the authors, he talked about how there's been this this sort of cult-like stream in the church in the last 60, 70, 80 years where there's all these movements that pop up, and they always have this charismatic founder, like so-and-so starts this, so-and-so starts this, so-and-so's having visions of this, whatever, whether they're approved or not. And some of the stuff is approved, but there's this same danger in it that you're kind of following the charismatic personality of a founder. Whereas when you look at Lefebvre, he's kind of the opposite. He was retired, and they're like, please come help us. He says, no, there's people that can help you. I'm retired. And then it's like, we tried, there's nobody. Okay, fine, I'll start a seminary. And he was very reluctant to do anything because he says, I'm not doing anything for me. I'm doing this because this is what I was told I have to do. It was kind of the opposite sort of mentality. So one of the things that I think ties into this film from that stream of thought that I have right here is that they did present the film as a universal thing. It's not just, people who read The Remnant like to go to Mass in hotels. It's not just, Father Hess has some awesome sermons online, and they are awesome, or whatever they are, conversations, and people who like those really like Smells and Bells. It was no matter what language someone speaks, no matter what socioeconomic background, no matter what country, no matter what profession, no matter what era, this is something that hits everybody the same. And I really did think that the inclusion of Leah Darrow, her last name, what's her last name? She changed her name when she got married, obviously. What was her name? Do you guys know?
Oh, I can't recall.
I feel so bad. This is the second time I've talked about it online, and I forget her husband's name because it's like a foreign spelling, and I can't remember. I actually, if she's watching this, and maybe the filmmakers, I'm sure they're in contact with her, if you could please let her know how grateful I am to her, because years ago when my wife and I were coming back to the church, my wife, I converted hard and fast, and then she was following me not as fast, and we were going for a drive one day, and I said, oh, well, let's just listen to this CD, and I snuck in one of those Lighthouse Media CDs, and it was her testimony about coming back to the church and going to confession, and my wife loved it. And she looked at me like, you bastard, you're going to make me go to confession now, aren't you? And she was crying and all this stuff because it's a beautiful story. And so I actually owe Leah so much gratitude for what she did. So I was so inspired to see her in the film because she was like this darling of the sort of, conservative Catholic speaker circuit. And here she is in a film. And Dr. K knows this, Matt knows this, Tim knows this. If you out yourself as a trad, whether you're SSPX or not, the full communion crowd might not want to invite you to play in the sandbox anymore. That's something that happens to all of us. Mm-hmm. So for her to go on the film being this darling of this sort of conservative Steubenville conference kind of world, and then to come in and say, she basically said, when we went to the TLM, we could be Catholic for the first time, which I thought was astounding. For the first time they could fully be Catholic, and no matter what happens, they're going to follow the TLM until the ends of the earth. I thought that was really powerful. And that kind of goes off of this idea that this is not just some movement for a particular group. This is Catholicism. It's not the traditional Catholic movement. It's the Catholic faith. And I think they did a good job of trying to show that reality.
Yeah, that's the strength of the trilogy that I want to highlight with what I'm about to say. But first, I want to second what Kennedy said, that we would love to have a full film about the SSPX. And here's a great suggestion from Sam. He says a more focused film on St. Mary's, Kansas, and the Immaculata would be great. Because I always bring this up when I talk to people about the SSPX, because I say to them, well, actually, the Bishop of St. Mary's, Kansas, said you can go to the SSPX, and that's the largest church in North and South America built in the past how many years? I don't know. It's a massive church. I just visited last August. Or October, rather. This would be great to have a film about the SSPX, a film about St. Mary's, Kansas. That would be great.
I just sent you something in the private chat to put up my report on that. I'm actually the one who found that out, the Archdiocese of Kansas City.
There we go. Yeah, and a very important note that I'll put here in the live chat right now. The biggest SSPX church in North America is in full communion, everybody.
Yep.
News alert. So the thing that I loved about it is kind of, Kwasniewski already highlighted this, Kennedy already mentioned this with Leah, and that is the what I called the trad godmothers against the world. That was my what I wanted to highlight is, I think, the Marian element of the trilogy, which may have been unintentional, but I see it. And here's the French mothers, who are the heroes. Really the heroes of every movie, of each of the three movies, are these women. And it's either the widow of here, let me go through here. So it's first the Mouse family, Christine Mouse, who is a widow, and it's their story. And then in film number 2, Jodie LaCroix, who's also a widow. And this is also an element of the Virgin Mary that is less discussed, but Mary also was a widow, in fact. And this is an important element. And then we have perhaps my favorite are Judy Frettel and Mary Pop. Because these are the trad godmothers who were working in the trenches, making vestments and that sort of thing for the trad movement, when the trad movement was way underground outside the SSPX. And even with the SSPX in the 70s and 80s, as I think Mary Pop says, if you wanted the Latin Mass, you were a heretic. This is the type of opprobrium that they were facing, and I think there's something about mothers in particular, where like the French mothers who go to Rome, there's just a certain feminine aspect to, I'm not going to take this and I'm just going to do what's right. And I don't care who says what. Like there was one line from one of the French mothers who just said, people are laughing at me because they think it's useless. Well, complaining and doing nothing, that's easy. I'm just going to go to Rome now. I mean, there's something beautiful where it's like a man wouldn't think to do that. I'm like, hey, let's walk to Rome. It's just like mothers just want to do what they can, and because they know it's right. And there's just sort of an intuitive strength there. They know what to do and they do it. And that's what I loved about the trilogy. And that's kind of what Kwasniewski was mentioning. This is sort of the women in these three films highlight the common good of the church, because by representing women represent the faithful, because the nave of the church is the bride of Christ. That's why only men are in the sanctuary, because they represent the transcendent nature of Christ as priest. That's why men and women, but we represent the bride of Christ in the liturgical spousal spirituality of the Mass itself. And so by highlighting these women, the women become the icon of all the faithful, who are the common good, who are fighting for the basic right to just have the basic Mass, the ancient Roman rite.
It's very synodal. They should pay attention, right?
Yes, and I mean, in fact, what you're saying, Timothy, just relates so well to the church as our Holy Mother Church. She's the alma mater, the nourishing mother. And what does the mother do? She provides nourishment for her children. And that's the main, when you think about, obviously about a nursing mother with the baby is completely dependent on the mother. And this is an image that comes up throughout spirituality of the dependence, that we should have on Holy Mother Church, but she should be nourishing us. It's like the prophet Isaiah says, could a mother forget her child? Right? Almost like as a rhetorical question. No, she shouldn't. I mean, even if she did, God will never forget us. But it's tapping into that sense of a mother exists to nourish her children. And where does that nourishment primarily come through? It comes through the liturgy and the sacraments of the church, right? And not just in some kind of legal, positivistic, narrow form and matter valid sense where it's just, like a mechanistic, sense of liturgy and sacraments, but the whole ritual life of the church. Yes, the smells and bells, but also more than the smells and bells, the texts of the Mass, the chants of the Mass, the customs, the rubrics, everything that priests have been doing for century after century. All of this is part of the nourishment that Holy Mother Church is giving to her priests, to her deacons, her subdeacons, her ministers, her lay people, men and women, children. All of them are being nourished from these rites, And I mean, this. I feel like a broken record, but I keep saying to people that we are not focused on sacraments in some kind of reductionistic sense. We are focused on rites. We have rites. The church has rites, not just like little discrete sacramental, like a Pez dispenser where you get like a piece of candy or something. It's the whole ritual life of the church, the calendar, the lectionary, the feast days. All these things are meant to wrap around Catholic life like a blanket, and just completely not smother us, obviously, but they keep us warm and alive, and so I think that the film also does a really good actually all three episodes do a really great job of showing liturgy as a way of life. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just like, okay, we're going to go on Sunday to this hour and we're aesthetes. And so we like the smells and bells, whatever. And it's kind of like, some people accuse traditionalists of LARPing, live action role playing. So we want to be medievals for 1 hour a week because our modern life is so gray and empty and meaningless. So we want to be like knights and dames or something for just 1 hour a week. No, it's not that at all. It's that the liturgy permeates the lives of the lay people and the priests in these episodes. And that's why I think it's so beautiful that the filmmaker shows, the family getting ready for Mass in St. Louis. It shows them, collecting the eggs from the chickens. It shows the beekeepers. We haven't even talked about the Martinez family, It shows these people doing all the simple things that go to make a Catholic life, and yet it culminates in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, right? As it should. I just think it's a wonderful testimony to a coherent, integral Catholic life, which you can so easily find in traditional communities.
And there's a reason why the Novus Ordo does not naturally lead to people becoming beekeepers or collecting eggs on their own property or all that kind of stuff. Like, the opposite is true as well.
I want to add something. I agree, Dr. K, but I have no problem admitting that my life is meaningless without the traditional Mass. Because I am nothing before God. And the only reason I exist is to love and serve God in this life and the next. And so if people think, and please, people, don't confuse my meaning. Obviously, I love my children, love my wife, etc. But the Catholic mentality is, in front of God, we are nothing. And with God, we are with him who is everything. So that there is this liturgy. And there's nothing wrong with, Dr. K, you did that book on sacred music. This is a Dr. K book hour, by the way. Dr. K did that great book on good music, sacred music, and silence. Actually, just from an objective perspective of the metaphysics of what music is about, if someone does prefer the music of the traditional Mass, if they do prefer the aesthetics of the traditional Mass, if they do prefer the aesthetics of traditional Catholic art, that's actually a testimony to an order in the person's soul. And that's a good thing. So on the other hand, we shouldn't shy away from it. Yes, one of the reasons I don't want to go to the Novus Ordo is because the art is bad. And that's not because I'm some snob. It's because art is objectively good or bad, and I don't want to be in a place where the stuff is bad because God is good. So on the one hand, it's more than the art, but on the other hand, that's intrinsically part of it. So we also, as traditionalists, when people say you love smells and bells, you say, yes, I do, because God does. That's why he willed it to be that way for 19 and a half centuries. Exactly. So you should probably like them too. What's wrong with you if you don't?
Exactly. Yeah. And I agree with you. I definitely wasn't trying to say anything other than that. But I'm very conscious of the fact that as a musician myself, a lot of people have over the years have flung at me the criticism of, you're an aesthete, you're an intellectual, you're not talking about common people. Well, no, it's actually the common people who most of all appreciate the beauty of our churches and the beauty of our liturgies. I remember Cardinal Burke was once telling me about this amazing experience he had in Spain. He was invited to go there, and he did a solemn pontifical Mass in Spain. And he said there were many homeless people at this Mass. They had heard about it. And I mean, who knows? It might have even been something like, hey, there's something to do. Let's go and see this thing. Maybe they didn't have, lofty motives or whatever, but they were completely absorbed. He said they loved it. And afterwards they crowded around him. They couldn't say enough about how beautiful and uplifting it was. And Cardinal Burke's comment was, we just gave the poor the riches that no one else could give them. The church has the riches to give to all of humanity, especially to the poor. And the poor themselves gave all their pennies to build these great churches, right? I am 100% on board with the idea that if your liturgy isn't beautiful, if it isn't glorious, or at least, glorious for a high Mass, but solemn for a quiet low Mass too. Well, if it doesn't have these qualities, then there is something wrong with your liturgy, and there's something wrong with your conception of God, frankly. Yeah. And I just want to make one last point. That young atheist the former atheist, rather, that they interview in Nice, I really liked him. He had a rather small part in the film, but he says, I grew up in an atheist family, and some friends invited me to the traditional Latin Mass. And he basically says the Gregorian chant and everything else just pierced me, and now I'm a Catholic, right? This is the evangelizing power of beauty. What an incredible testimony that was.
Absolutely. I just one quick point I wanted to make here. Noelle was asking, in the wedding scene at the end of the third film, the bride looks like the young widow who was featured in the first film. Is that true? That would be a beautiful way to wrap up the trilogy. And yes, in fact, this is Christine Maus, who was featured in the first film, and her husband died, and this is her new marriage to her new husband. And so this is the ending of the third film. just so everyone knows.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
So we've got 10 more minutes. Further comments, thoughts? Gentlemen, go ahead.
I think something else that we definitely need to keep in mind, I wrote about this recently for Catholic Family News. The article is called, "Is a Reverend Novus Ordo Just as Good?" I'll send you a link in the private chat so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. But I think the danger, one of the dangers, especially in regard to the rescript that's the mention that came out in February of last year, bishops are now going to be tempted to say, well, a reverent Novus Ordo is just as good. That's essentially what's going on in the Diocese of Austin, Texas right now. The bishop, unfortunately, wrote in to get Rome's perspective on what he should do, and surprise, surprise, Cardinal Roach said, shut it down. So this bishop says in his letter towards the end that the traditional Mass at the cathedral, the last day of it was March 19th, the Feast of St. Joseph, and they'll be transitioning. They have transitioned to the Novus Ordo, basically doing Ad Orientem with all in Latin, with Gregorian chant, et cetera, and basically making it sound like the Novus Ordo is really no different in substance textually than the traditional Mass, which is obviously not true. That's what I go through in my article. But he says, while this transition may be difficult for some, my hope is that you can open your hearts and move forward on this path with faith and trust. I believe we will experience a deepened unity with the whole Church and a greater awareness of the liturgical richness of the ordinary form. I'm sure Dr. K has some choice words for that, of the Roman liturgy. I assure you of my closeness and pastoral care as your bishop. And I'm not saying this bishop is of bad will or something, or I think probably just doing what he thinks he has to do, but I don't know what you guys' take on this situation here.
Right. Well, I mean, your article was excellent, Matt. I really enjoyed it when I read it. I shared it widely, and I said, this is a great article because you're very pithy. You know, you didn't write a book the way I would have done, but you laid out very simply, look at the huge differences objectively between these two rites. I mean, you were mostly looking at texts, a little bit at rubrics.
Right.
But the point is that, I mean, and this is really what episode 2 of Mass of the Ages did. Remember that amazing 3-minute, it's like maybe 3-minute sequence where they go through the missal and show all the stuff that was pulled out and changed and rewritten and so forth. So people just have to recognize that there are huge objective differences. It's not just how it's done, but what is being done and why it's being done, right? And I think, Timothy, you just briefly showed, I have a similar article called Why the Latin Novus Ordo is Not the Solution that I published at 1 Peter 5, where I was just basically talking about all the reasons why, if you try to do the Novus Ordo in a traddy fashion, it's actually going to disappoint people in all kinds of ways. It sort of can't help. The more you try to make it like the traditional Mass, the more, in fact, it highlights some of the problems. It's a kind of paradox, right? But when you make it look very similar, you actually point all the more to the deep differences, right?
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that people think that 13% of the old missal is the same thing as 100%. We just need to do some basic math, bishops. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, and I'll make this sort of my last salvo here. You know, in these last 10 days where I was, living like it was 2005, meaning I just didn't have it, was using my phone and stuff. It was like going back in time. It was awesome. But funny enough, I read a lot. I mean, it's amazing how much time you waste on your phone. And even if you think it's good stuff, and I finished like 400 pages of reading, it was awesome. But one of the things I've been going over, because I've been in this game now for almost 5 years, talking about tradition and the SSPX and whatever. And for people that know me, they know this, but if you don't, I actually don't work for the society. I never have. I probably never will, because I'm probably more useful to them being a free agent than having to go through the official channels. But one of the things that I've had conversations about tradition, not just the SSPX tradition. I've had conversations about tradition with hundreds and hundreds of people. And usually, or I shouldn't say usually, often the conversations begin as someone who's being very I want to say antagonistic. People have a problem with me. They want to talk to me. This is why I have a problem with you. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it was like that in the beginning. And in the first couple of years, first 2 or 3 years, I did my best to try to say, no, please accept me. This is why I'm just like you. This is why, I'm Catholic. And that's natural because you're being accused of something. It's kind of like when somebody calls you a racist, you want to say, I'm not a racist, but you don't realize that when you start saying why you're not, you've already lost because you're giving in to this accusation they're giving you. One of the things that traditional Catholics of all stripes, I don't care where you go to Mass, you've got to start imbibing a mentality that it's not our job to explain. I mean, it's useful, but it's not your job as a lay who wants to save your soul to explain to everybody why you're correct in going to the traditional Mass. You need to say to these people and say, no, you explain to me how the Novus Ordo was Catholic. You need to explain to me why what has happened in the last 50 or 60 years is God's will, because I'm just a simple person. I look at history, I look at catechisms, and I say, this is one thing, and this is against that thing. And one of these was willed by the church and by the guidance of the Holy Ghost in the church for 19 and a half centuries, and the other came out of nowhere. And everyone has their reasons, of course, because heretics always have reasons. Martin Luther quoted the Bible, Calvin quoted the Bible. Everyone can have reasons. But you just got to use your Catholic sense and say, the Catholic faith is here, and it's obvious. And here it's not obvious, and it's a lot of the time not there. So I'm going to go where I'm going to save my soul. I'm going to raise my children where they can save their souls. And if you think that I'm going to be damned because of a technicality, because I didn't understand a subsection of canon law when I stand in front of St. Peter, then move over, Pharisees. We've got a new gig in town. So Catholics should really, after this film, this series of films, they should say to themselves, the Latin Mass is beautiful. The Latin Mass is good. The Latin Mass is true. There are things people are going to work out in dicasteries or whatever the heck the next pope renames them. Maybe they'll go to congregations again or whatever. We can play this tennis game between the Ratzingerians and the modernists and blah, blah, blah. We are Catholics. We're here on this earth as pilgrims. One day we're going to leave, and we're going to either go up or we're going to go down. And the best way to go up is to hold fast to the faiths of your ancestors, and people don't have to waste their time getting involved in legal technicalities as if that's how you save your soul.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
Kwasniewski, please. Final word.
Yeah. So actually, and very, very related to that comment, even though I was thinking of saying it before you spoke, Kennedy, I thought the opening of episode 3 was absolutely brilliant, just brilliant to show the French lady who is so removed from her Catholic roots that she has no clue what the stained glass windows are about. Mm-hmm. And she's rejoicing that this church has been turned into a luxury hotel, right? And then it shows churches burning, right? The Church of the Institute in Chicago, the Notre Dame in Paris. I mean, obviously they're mixing natural disasters together with disasters caused by iconoclasts or vandals or whatever. So, but what it's showing in a very powerful way, visceral way, is that the church on earth is burning. The church on earth is suffering earthquakes. The church on earth is crumbling. It's under attack, right? This is what's happening right now. Wake up, people, okay? Mm-hmm. What is the solution to that? Well, first of all, how did this attack come about? Why is the church under siege? It's because of this idiotic idea that we have to throw open the windows to the secular world. We have to aggiornamento. We have to, raise the bastions, as Hans Urs von Balthasar said, tear down the fortress mentality, right? Basically open up to the world. That, for 60 years now, has decimated the church, right? And that's what we're seeing evocatively shown in those opening scenes. And then in contrast, right, where are the Catholics who still believe the faith, who still live the faith, who still want to live and die for the faith, like the Cristeros, right? Well, you're going to find them, they're not only traditionalists, but you'll find a lot of them among the traditionalists, right? And so that's where I think I thought that the opening was just masterful, and kudos to the director for that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this podcast. This has been great. It's a bit of joy. I wanted to thank Cameron Ahern for letting this happen, because I think it says a lot about his character as a filmmaker, and that he could just have 4 guys. So he has no idea what we're about to say. We can just be honest. We like this. We didn't like this, whatever. So thank you, Cameron Ahern, for letting this happen. And thank you for creating Mass of the Ages. I'm very excited for the continued future. I mean, we're just living in exciting times as Catholics. It's a very exciting time to be a Catholic. So we need to
say
one
go
thing. Go ahead.
I know that they didn't tell us what I was going to say, but you guys also got the Rolex he sent us, right, before we started this show?
I didn't get mine. You got the Rolex? Oh, yes. Cameron says next time we'll definitely smoke the peace pipe and drink the whiskey and all that good stuff. So, all right, gentlemen. So, and just a reminder to go to 1peter5.com/crusade. That's our lay fidelity, crusade of Eucharistic reparation. That's the heart of really the whole trad movement, is wanting to give God the glory that is his due, which is the critical point, is that why we care about the Latin Mass in the first place. And then we can save our souls. So go to 1peter5.com/crusade to join the lay fidelity. With that, happy Annunciation observed. Christ is risen.
The Mass of the Ages donors are bringing traditional Catholicism to millions. Go to latinmass.com/give to join the movement.